Okay, good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
So today is Friday, August 29th, and do we have any good news out there? Anything you want to
Any
update us
good
on?
news? Um, yeah, in the just looming disaster. I suppose it's probably the best news is the the apparent rapprochement between India and China. We had seen evidence of that earlier, but the two leaders seem to be, thanks to Donald Trump and his hostility towards India, the punitive tariffs that he's imposed on India. India has, I think, made a real effort, and the Chinese realize that there's an opening. There's a chance to mend relations further, and that seems to be underway. And it should continue at this upcoming SCO conference on Sunday in Tianjin.
This divide, where does it stem from between India and China? And is this something that the United States was actively trying to, exacerbate?
Uh, well, I think recently they have. They would like to peel India away from China, but its roots are really between the two countries. It goes back to the 1960s and a border dispute in the very high altitudes. Apparently it's such a high altitude where this border is that you can't even fire guns there. We're talking way up in the Himalayas.
What happens? Why can't you fire a gun?
There's just not enough oxygen.
So it
Oxygen
doesn't
is part.
it doesn't spark?
Yeah, right. It's hard to. That's one of the necessary ingredients for any kind of fire for ignition is the presence of oxygen in a certain percentage. Um, so yeah, and not too long ago, what was it? Just maybe uh, you know 3 years ago, there was another uh, border, more than a dispute, a clash, and it actually took place again because of the inability to use guns. They swung sticks at each other, clubs at each other, and
I remember that story. Yeah, that was like,
right,
yeah, maybe 5 years ago or something. And they
yeah,
were using
something like that,
like bats with nails in them, just really medieval type of battle.
right.
And I was
Some people, I think,
I thought it was just a rule for some reason they had up there, like we're for some reason there's no guns here. It's just a melee. I didn't understand.
yeah. But there have been real tensions, and it goes back to the 1960s. Prior to the 1960s, actually, relations between India and China were quite good. But there was just this question about where the boundary line should be drawn, and that dispute led to an actual war, which back then the Chinese won, but the Indians have never really accepted the result of that. Um, Let me just mute my phone for a second here. Right.
Sure. So is this hugely significant? Were they warming together already because China and India are both part of BRICS? Is this a really
Yeah.
big step? Was this something that was kind of
Well,
happening, or is this really
yeah.
big?
Well, I wouldn't call it a real big step. It was something that was already happening. There had been moves, gestures in the just the last year or two, to thaw the relationship. But that process has accelerated since, again, Donald Trump's punitive tariffs on India. So that's good news. I mean, the world's two most populous countries are extending the olive branch, laying down the hatchet. I don't know that there was a real chance of any real war between them, but there was tension, and that was always a potential obstacle to further development of BRICS. Because there are two very, very important members of BRICS right there, and if the two of them, if there's serious friction between them, that two of them, that was going to be an impediment to all kinds of BRICS projects. But it looks like that friction is going away, and we should be thankful for that.
Is it going away because they settled that land dispute? Did they just say we're splitting it down the middle, or is it just they
Well,
said
they
let's not
haven't
even
done
worry
that
about
yet.
it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's what they may decide to do that, um, just to set it aside. or maybe they are, working on a compromise that we just don't know what they're saying behind closed doors now. But the good thing is they're talking, and there have been real, again, important, meaningful gestures like a resumption of direct flights between the nations, and visits back and forth by the foreign ministers. Modi's going to be in China, at the SCO meeting on Sunday. So these are all, I think, highly significant.
Do you think there's an awareness amongst the administration that we have united much of the world against us?
I don't know about within the administration. Trump doesn't seem to understand that. He just seems to think that, well, again, I'm the world hegemon and they should be listening to me. They should be obeying me. And when they don't, it's because they're being terribly unreasonable. But there is definitely an awareness within parts of the establishment. No less a person than John Bolton actually was very critical of Trump's punitive tariffs on India. He said this was just insane. And he was, for once he was right. It just didn't make any sense from a U.S. strategic point of view. It very, very negligible, if any, economic gains for us, and just a huge diplomatic, a geopolitical loss.
Yeah, I don't see how you cannot be aware. How the Trump administration can't. They have to be aware, right? I mean, you can just sense it. You can just feel it.
Yeah.
You can see it. Everybody, they're all coming together, and it's just common sense. You've been attacking the whole world. I mean, just the support for Gaza in itself would probably unite a lot of people against us. And then you have this on top of the tariffs, on top of what we're doing in Ukraine, and then the few friends that we do have, we're twisting their arms. They're not really our friends. I don't think they like this relationship, but they're still part of it, but unwilling partners. There has to be just common sense. I mean, he's a businessman. He has to read the room.
Right. You would think so. We don't want to put this all on Trump because, this all preceded Trump. Trump is just accelerating the process. But,
tariffs,
again, many
though,
people.
I mean,
yeah, the tariffs, that's a new thing. That's right. And that has, and especially the tariffs on allies. I think that's something that the previous administration would never have done. And that's really quite extraordinary. But this position of bringing our enemy, because of our general hostility, our hostility to so much of the world, we've driven our enemies together and united them against us. That preceded Trump. Again, that was Biden was very hostile to China, not just to Russia, and of course to Iran. He helped, and previous administrations helped to solidify, these relationships and to essentially create a bloc, even if they're not calling it a bloc. It's just because of our, again, kind of general undifferentiated hostility. Quite naturally, all the countries that are on the receiving end of it are going to band together to resist our hostility and our penalties and so forth. It's just that Trump has taken this to up to the next level and beyond with his tariffs. I think under Biden there was tension already between the U.S. and India, but there was criticism of India's policies, and accusations that they were behind an assassination, this kind of thing, very public accusations. But I think there were these criticisms. So this resulted in a certain amount of tension between the U.S. and India, but the relationship basically held up. But it has really suffered under Trump. It's not just his tariffs, but some of his previous statements, like his claim that somehow he single-handedly brought about a truce between India and Pakistan. The Indians apparently are very upset about that. They say it's completely untrue, that it was actually the Pakistanis that came to India. And, that's what the Indians say. So there's a great deal of anger with India. Actually, like Modi himself is being very careful, very measured. in what he's saying about the U.S. He hasn't launched any kind of he's used very temperate language vis-a-vis the U.S. But it's clear, first of all, that they're remaining firm. They're actually increasing their purchases of Russian oil, and they said quite, very politely but very firmly, we are an independent country, and we're not going to, bow down and allow you to dictate to us, what our policies are. And then at the same time, he's, again, opening the door to China. So you can see there's been a real change.
Right. Yeah. India always felt like it was a country that was kind of in the U.S. camp. There's strong relations, big, lots of ties between us and India. But now, do you feel that these ties are largely severed or severing, or has there been a poll recently in India to show Indians' views of the United States? I mean, I imagine the favorability has to have been plummeting.
Yeah, right. Well, I've heard that, again, Modi has been very, very temperate in his language. But if you go onto Indian social media, this is what I hear. The language is not at all temperate. People are really very, very angry in India. They're very angry about this. It's kind of similar to like what you find in Russia, where like the general population actually just wants the Russian military to take their gloves off, and but Putin's always very, very careful, very cautious, and again is very, very reluctant to actually openly condemn the Americans or anything. Modi's kind of the same way, but. Yeah, if there's any pressure with India, it's actually to actually distance ourselves even further from the U.S. At least that's from the general population, as I understand it. Now, there's a large business community that has been very strongly pro-U.S. There are a lot of connections. As you know, there are many Indians living in the U.S., many very highly educated Indians. I think they're in the U.S. they're the single wealthiest, ethnic group. So many doctors and engineers, IT guys are Indians in this country. So there are real ties, between the U.S. and India. But again, it's kind of similar to what happened in Russia, where there were many, many ties between Russians, and especially educated Russians in the West. And the educated Russians tended to be, very favorable towards the West. But because of the West's own policies, that they themselves have been turning away. And like your sister was just telling me the other day, she knows somebody that was in that camp. The one guy that ran off, when the mobilization was first announced by Putin back in 2022, and then came back. But his mother she's talked to her, and she was always very, very pro-Western, and always said, like I'll never go to Sochi. I'm sure that's just a trashy place, and always vacationed in Western Europe and Italy, and but now she's changed her mind. I mean, a lot of it is because of the sanctions. They're forced, well, I guess we'll try Sochi. Hey, Sochi's actually great, It's actually better than the place in Italy that we used to go to. What were we thinking? This is a process that's happening in Russia, and maybe we're seeing the beginnings of it in India too.
Yeah, no, it just makes perfect sense. Why we turn the whole world against us. But it's interesting also thinking about, we talk about the multipolar world, and in my mind, the multipolar world was just like everybody's kind of equal, and there's their own group in each area. But with the the developments between India and China and Russia, we kind of almost have more like a super pole right there. If those three countries together, I mean that's really BRICS. I mean, just population-wise, we're talking about 40% of the world just between India, China, and Russia, and mostly, of course, India and China make up basically 95% of that, almost 90%.
Right.
But you have Russia that basically has unlimited resources, so you can just have this sort of perfect synergy of the manufacturing power and the working labor capital of these countries that. In my mind, it's like, okay, well, that's the future. This is where it's going to be. Brazil will do things, maybe South Africa will do things, whatever. But really, this is where it's at, and it's almost like you were having a new pole, and it's right here. These three countries.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. Now, like all the BRICS leaders say, we are not interested in bloc politics, and I think to a great extent they're sincere about that. But the problem is that bloc politics may be interested in you. I think that's what they're discovering. Like India is discovering. The Indians were particularly, firm about that. We're not going to do. We're not interested in developing an alternative to the dollar and all this and that. And but again, it's like each one of these countries, after they get a direct taste of of U.S. hostility, they get clubbed by the U.S. It wakes them up and say, hey, we've actually got to reorient ourselves. We can't just be. We have to be prepared for an all-out attack by the U.S. Not necessarily military, and so that means we need to tighten and improve our ties with all these people and develop alliances or quasi-alliances, strategic partnerships with these other nations. It just becomes a matter of necessity. I think that's what we see happening. It's just, because we, it just seems like we're incapable of just letting countries go their own way and respecting their sovereignty. We are creating a bloc in Eurasia.
Right. Yeah, it's a 3-country superpower bloc. But I feel almost like it's safer in a way if you have 3 countries that all provide something unique, I believe, in the relationship. I don't think you can just say one is definitively better than all the others in any category. So I feel like that gives a sense of balance, where in the United States, you just have the U.S. and it gets to run around and dictate everything. Here, I don't have the fear of any type of hegemonic thinking being born out of a sort of a 3 block, which they're all what's also interesting is they're all very distinctly different culturally and ethnically, right. So it just creates this natural balance that I'm more comfortable with having this lead the world. Like, okay, they shouldn't go so insane and have, just one type of ideological thinking won't be able to grip all 3 of them. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that seems to be true. I mean, that none of these countries is in the grip of some sort of ideological zealotry. They were in the past. I mean, certainly China and Russia were under the Maoists in China, and then under the Soviets in Russia. But I think actually that experience kind of disabused them of certain notions, and they decided, yeah, we're not doing that again. That didn't work out. It didn't work out well for the world or for us. And they have, I think quite consistently just taken a much humbler approach. We're not interested in interfering in the sovereignty of other countries. They can, each country can develop along its own path, and just let us develop on our path. I really. They seem to be very sincere about that. I mean, they back that up with actions, and I think you find out again and again. It's like the rhetoric in this country is that these are authoritarian countries that are want to that are aiming to subordinate these other countries and force them to conform to their own objectives, their own dictates. But the reality is really quite the reverse. Just like you see what happens in places like Belarus. That's a good example. That we forget, because now Belarus is so tight with Russia. Lukashenko is really thrown in his lot completely with the Russians, but we forget why. It wasn't too long ago that he was playing the 2 sides off against each other. He was kind of playing footsie under the table with the Westerners, and he was making all kinds of concessions to the EU, and but then so he thought that he had gotten on the good side of them, and the Russians didn't anything and say, okay, again, we just hope you'll stay neutral. But you have your own country. But the EU doesn't have that thought, and they attempted a coup. And when he became aware of that, they attempted a color revolution. That was the end of it. It was just like, okay, I can't trust these people. They won't accept my sovereignty. The Russians will. So we're going into the Russian camp, and I think other countries are finding that out, like Georgia too.
Okay, so if most of the world is banding together against us, and we have very, very powerful countries that we never thought would be together, now together, basically to be an antidote to the United States, and then the our few friends that we do have secretly hate us and curse us behind our back, then how long can this go on? What does this mean for us? This significant? Does it just mean that we'll get the rug pulled out from under us? The dollar's going to collapse? Like what happens?
Yeah, well, it can go on for a while. For I think it's potentially, yeah, it could go on for quite a while. Even if there's a great deal of grumbling, we're still a very powerful country. We have all kinds of levers, military and economic. Our soft power has been degraded, but it's still actually quite powerful within, the Western sphere. I think outside, where there's much more awareness of what we've done, especially like in places like Gaza, the soft power is diminished significantly. It is just diminishing within the Western sphere, but we still have very firm control, let's say, of the information space. And that means that a surprisingly large number, I know that it's decreasing over time and there are more and more dissidents, but it's still a surprisingly large number of people really do believe in the authorities in the West. So it could last for a while, but maybe comes down to the dollar. It's just like for a lot of people, maybe, like the West has lost its gleam, but there's still a lot of dollars there, and dollars are worth having. And, so we'll maybe want to immigrate there, or we want to do business with them. But if the dollar really does collapse, if it loses its reserve status, then it's like, people will finally say, well, what's the point? It's just like, why are we oriented towards the West? You still see people that are like fanatically oriented to the West, doing whatever they can to bring their countries into it. Like was it Maya Sandu in Moldova, or Pashinyan in Armenia? But these people seem to me particularly foolish. Like they're jumping onto a sinking ship. 20 years ago, I could have understood it, but now it just seems I wouldn't have approved it. I don't think it would have been right, and even very intelligent at that time. But you could still understand why people had this faith in the West. But it's still there. It's amazing. Even though if they really open their eyes, they can understand that this is a mistake to really tie ourselves to this enterprise. I think it's going to, like the Pashinyans and the Sandus, they're going to lose, they're going to cease to exist when the dollar, ceases to exist, or at least as a reserve currency. That's my guess.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm always kind of surprised how long the dollar is able to keep going. I just feel like with the writings on the wall, then wouldn't that lend to some type of almost the panic run instead of people walking away from the dollar? Shouldn't they be sprinting away from the dollar now? But it seems like everybody is. It's like there's a fire in the movie theater and everybody is slow walking to the exit. But at some point, aren't when people going to start running, and then it's just
yeah.
Or is there a chance that these countries, like the amount of debt that I know China's been divesting a lot of its U.S. treasuries, been unloading its debt, but it still has a lot. I mean, couldn't these BRICS countries have this debt is kind of their Damocles sword for the United States, right? Couldn't they just say, like, if the U.S. really tries to go after them, via tariffs, militarily, whatever, can they just say, well, okay, we're dumping all of our dollars, and then who wants to buy these dollars? Nobody wants them anymore. Most of the world's rejecting it, and then the United States is in trouble. The U.S. has to buy them themselves. We start having hyperinflation. Like, is that the plan? I'm trying to think it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a
yeah. Well, I could see. I don't know that it is the plan of the Chinese, but sure, it does give them a weapon that they could use in the case of open conflict. I mean, there are actually so many different weapons they can use because the U.S. is in so many ways dependent on China. Again, even our military-industrial complex is dependent on Chinese manufacturing to a great extent. Rare earths is just one example of that. And then, as we found out during COVID, there are all kinds of supply chains that have their beginning in China. Um, so, yeah, and then another weapon they have, of course, is those U.S. Treasury bonds. They could just dump them all in one fell swoop. But I don't know what their strategy is. That's, it's possible that may be part of their, what they're holding them in reserve for that. Or they may be just walking away from it, because if you dump them all at once, you don't get a very good price on them. And maybe that's why they're walking. And see, like before the panic, they try to sell as much as they can at sell them off so they get a decent return. Yeah, wherever, right.
Don't the Brits hold more than the Chinese now? Something like that?
I don't know. Yeah, that would be quite extraordinary, but it may be true.
Yeah, I feel bad for all of our so-called friends. We're just unloading all of our debt onto them. Like, you take this, buy all of our weapons, give us all your money, and they're just like, yes, thank you. You know, like, don't you realize what's happening here, guys?
Yeah.
And part of me, I don't want to try to save the dollar, because I think it's beyond saving. So it's just, for me, it's like, maybe it's better. We just need to get it. If we get it over with now, and maybe it can help end the genocide in Gaza and end these wars, just end the U.S. empire. Because I feel like as soon as that's what needs to happen, as soon as the money dries up, or the money becomes worthless, you can't fund these projects anymore, these evil campaigns across the world. So yeah, I don't know. I need to come quick, but I feel like the BRICS should do it for the sake of the world,
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I would hope that that's the outcome, that there's actually just sort of a peaceful collapse, and then it followed by a period of rebuilding and reorientation, reassessment. That would be the ideal. But but a collapse like that, you never know what the outcome is. You say, we could have all kinds of dangerous demagogues arise. It doesn't. At this point, I'm not sure that we would respond to it rationally. Our tendency always seems to be to point the finger at someone else. It's the Venezuelans or whatever, they're behind this, the Iranians, right? And so it could lead to further military campaigns. They may not be able to support these, but they could still do a lot of damage. So I don't think it's possible that the BRICS are going to do that. I think they're going to be, all of those leaders are really, they have made firm decisions. It appears, which way they're headed, but they're prudent, rational, cautious people, and I think they're just going to let the U.S. fall on its own.
Yeah, okay, it makes sense. I mean, that's why I shouldn't be in charge. I'm always wanting to smash that button. Like, just what are we doing? Just get this over with.
Right.
But are you in agreement that there is no saving the dollar, though? Right? I think this is true. You just look at the huge trends that we're seeing between the creation of the BRICS and the fact that our economic sanctions don't work. It's just. And we have 37 trillion in debt, and we know that there's no digging out of this hole. It's just an inevitability at this point. And it's just weird to me that if you are aware of that, if you agree that the dollar is dead, what's everybody doing with these dollars? We're just like, we know the ending of the story, but nobody's acting like they know the end of the story. We just kind of pretend and just hope, because I guess the system is just so entrenched and ingrained that it has to move forward, but we know it doesn't work, but we got to keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of institutional inertia. The fact is that, of course, there are governments that are moving away from the dollar, but like you said, they're walking away from it. And so, for the first time, I think maybe ever, certainly in my memory, we do see that people, there is a steady trend, it's gradual, but away from the dollar. But why isn't it happening faster? Again, there's just this institutional inertia. I think there's just this sort of, what do you call it? Sort of a status quo bias. It's like, this is the way things are. And then you just kind of think that this is the way things have to be. It's been like this for decades and decades and decades, essentially since the end of World War II. And, we're talking about 80 years. So we've had generations, 3 generations since then. And it's just like that was the one thing you could rely on is the U.S. dollar. And it's hard for, I think, a lot of institutions and individuals to stop thinking that way. I think that's part of it. And then there's just and maybe a lot of people understand that, yeah, it's a matter of time, but they think they can get out, when that time comes or before the time. And that's true of a lot of investors. It's just, again, I think it is true. It's inevitable that this current system has to collapse. It's unsustainable. In the end, you look at it, the current trends, there's just no way that it can't collapse. But the question is when, and that's always a very difficult question to answer, and nobody really knows for sure. So I think probably a lot of people, there may be people in the establishment and central banks, they've convinced, yeah, this is going to happen. But at the present, it is convenient for us to hold these dollars. It's just like they're going to look for certain signs that it's imminent, and then hope, looking from their perspective, they hope that they can pull out of it, before the others do. But of course, that's a kind of a dangerous game. Everybody's thinking the same thing, and then it happens at once, and that's why, these walking turns to running, and we have this sudden collapse.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, like we said, it'll be the poor that get screwed. The asset class, the wealthy will still make off as bandits with this whole thing. They
Right.
already are, but I mean, it's just going to I think, accelerate. Do you think just historically, is America now the most hated it's ever been in its history?
Well, it probably is, again, in large part thanks to Gaza, but not just that, and we've seen again the tariffs that have been slapped on so-called friends. I think it's really is creating a lot of anger around the world among all kinds of people that were favorably disposed to us before. I understand that the Japanese and the South Koreans, like for the first time ever, are really starting to think, hey, maybe we need to diversify. Again, it's just like before, the strategy is you just stay in the U.S. camp. You're a loyal follower of the U.S. That and without exception. Well, now I think they're looking for more and more exceptions, and that's going to be the general trend.
Do you think that there's any way that we can become loved again, or that this is it? It's done. It's over. I mean, this in itself, that global sentiment towards a global hegemon is also its life bar. If the world doesn't want you as a global hegemon, it's just a matter of time that, we all know where this is going. So
Right.
is there any way you can reverse that and all of a sudden people love us again? I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only solution is to actually to accept the trend and become part of the multipolar world and give up on the idea of global hegemony. And I think that's the only way. That's all of these are symptoms of, actually a global hegemon that's losing its grip on power and is lashing out in different ways. And that's just going to it's going to cause the global hegemon to sink, to lose, just by flailing out, out in the way that it is now, to actually accelerate the process of its own demise. I think the only solution, is to actually truly adopt a humble foreign policy and become just one, yet one other pole, and a very important pole, within the multipolar world.
Do you think that's something that's possible, like within the next presidential election cycle? Could someone like Thomas Massie be there? And he seems like one of the few people that I think embodies that well,
I don't think it's possible.
No.
I just don't. I don't see. I mean, again, Thomas Massie is just one man within the Congress.
But can't one man? You said there's when you're in this environment.
I think only if there's a great crisis. But the thing, it does provide an opportunity for reasonable, rational people like Thomas Massie, but it also provides opportunities for all kinds of demagogues. And I think that the smart money would actually be on the demagogues. I'm afraid to say, I think because there's so little understanding of what's going on. Maybe I'm wrong, and people are starting to figure it out. I think they're figuring certain things out. I think the writing is on the wall for Israel. I think, but in a recent vote, there were actually, I believe, 38 Democrats that voted to cut off all military supplies to Israel. That's still a long ways from where you need to be, but that's a big step. You just never would have seen that before. It's clear that, and they're responding to pressure below them. I mean, they're actually way behind where the base is. There was an attempt, I think, at the recent DNC conference to make that, a stated policy of the Democrats, the cut off military aid. But the Democratic Party establishments, again, just wasn't ready for that. But they may be forced to. The pressure is building under them. So, I don't know that we're, unfortunately, these people, they're good on Israel and Palestine, and that's an very important step in the right direction. But they still have the thinking, so many of them, of a global hegemon. We still need to punish these other countries like Russia and, Iran and so on and so forth. And even Venezuela, is crazy. But
yeah, what's going on with that? People are talking. We're not going to attack them or anything, are we? Are we just threatening them?
Yeah, I mean, we have like submarines and naval vessels off the coast, in the Caribbean. What is it? The stated purpose is to, an anti-drug smuggling operation. But what's a submarine supposed to do when it comes to that? It just doesn't make any sense. And they've created, I think they call it the Cartel del Sol. There's this powerful cartel that's in league with the Venezuelan government, they claim. And the Venezuelans and others are saying, I've never heard of the Cartel del Sol. It doesn't even exist. I don't know what's going on. But yeah, I'm afraid it's not impossible that we're going to launch some kind of military operation against Venezuela.
Really? We would?
Yeah, I know. It seems so crazy, but I mean, it's just we have a crazy government. Let's be honest.
Is it?
And it just may be that, like Trump is frustrated. He's starting to realize like he can't push the Russians around. He can't push the Chinese around.
Can't push the Houthis around.
Yeah, right. Even the Houthis, right. I mean, but maybe we can, this is our own hemisphere. And he seems to have this thinking, hey, the Western hemisphere belongs to us. And we're going to show that we're still in charge here. And it may be that, there was all that talk about Greenland and Canada earlier, and that's faded, thankfully. But things seem to be heating up vis-a-vis Venezuela.
But what's the plan?
I don't know if anybody.
What's the plan? Just kill a bunch of people and leave? I mean, like, what do you, or take over the government
to overthrow the government and install, somebody like Juan Guaido, who's going to be your loyal, obedient puppet.
It's so crazy.
But I don't think they're
not going to get away with that.
Yeah, I think there would be so much anger, not just in Venezuela. There are a lot of countries, a lot of the governments in South America are not friendly towards Maduro and his government, for various reasons. But I think there would instantly be a great deal of sympathy. The Latin Americans are very sensitive about, this. There's a history between the U.S. and Latin America, and if we're seen to be going back to our old, very blatant bullying ways, I think there's going to be a general reaction across Latin America.
Yeah, no, it sounds absolutely insane. It would be another failure, and I feel like I just don't think they would get away with it. It's not going to succeed. People hate us too much already. People aren't going to rise up and say, thank you, America, for overthrowing Maduro. It's like, get the heck out of here. We hate what you're doing in Gaza. We hate what you're doing around the world. Just go back, but
right.
I think you might might be right. What crossed my mind when he said that they might actually do it. It just like the U.S. just feels like it needs a win so badly because it's
Right.
just a string of humiliating defeats and losses while we're constantly chest thumping and saying we're the greatest military in the world, but we're having to run away from the Houthis. We're running out of equipment in Ukraine. We weren't able to defend Israel. It's just we didn't. We said we destroyed Iran's nuclear facilities, and it doesn't seem like that happened at all. So. Yeah, I don't know. But
Yeah,
it just like they would miscalculate. They're not. They won't succeed if they do it. They wouldn't succeed in Venezuela. I mean, they should
I
start
don't
like
think
with
so.
Micronesia. That's small
But
enough islands. You got your enough
yeah.
ships, and maybe one ship per little
Well,
island.
the problem is Micronesia is already very, very obedient. At least maybe I'm confusing them with Fiji.
I think they both are. They're both
Yeah, I
part of
think
that.
they are.
Yeah,
Right. It's
yeah,
like they're one of the of a handful of nations of the world that can be counted on to always, vote for uh, pro-Israel or against, pro-Palestinian resolutions in the UN.
yeah. Well, more of a reason to try to invade them. You're more likely to win. That's the yeah. But I don't know. If that happens, it would be such a dumb move. It would be unbelievable to me. It's just like
Yeah.
you think the lesson that we would learn after losing in all these conflicts and doing regime change wars that have disastrous outcomes, that maybe we should stop doing this, that we just can't do it. But instead, we just feel like, well, we just got to try another one, try another one.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Right. Well, yeah,
mental
that's been
patient.
true. And again, that precedes Trump, let's to be honest. But Trump, I don't know, I don't know that he has any more of a grasp on reality than Biden did. I
Yeah.
think there's more upstairs, but
Yeah,
it's
he
just so
speaks
chaotic.
better. He speaks better,
Yeah.
but it's just the mind. Yeah, it's just all
Yeah,
over
and
the
he's
place.
he's still pretty good at kind of
Riffing. Yeah.
like he understands how to control take control of a room, and he kind of he's again, he was a reality TV host, for a reason, and he still has those kind of skills, right? But I mean, for strategic thinking, I don't think he ever really had that skill. And then one of the problems is that we see that he is surrounding himself with sycophants. When you have, for example, when the head of the DIA came out with that assessment that actually the Iranian nuclear program had not been set back significantly, he fired him.
Yeah, right.
So he's just finding people around him that are yes men, and that's dangerous. That's a real problem. It's incompetent people that, they realize they're the careerists. The way to rise to the top is just to tell Trump exactly what he wants to hear. And that makes for a rather dangerous situation.
Right. Well, I don't think that we're going to make it through the Trump presidency without the U.S. being embroiled in a major war. Do you feel that way? Well, actually, let me rephrase. I think that we will try to attempt a real war, but we'll find that we won't be able to. That we won't be able to enact a draft. Get the troops. We will find out our factories aren't producing the munitions required. So
Right.
But we're headed for. There's just one path. The military industrial complex, even if it's running on empty, it still wants war, and we're going to get it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not sure. Again, we've talked about we're very well aware of the danger points. Again, when the collapse or something like a collapse occurs in Ukraine, and there will be enormous pressure for the U.S. to intervene, that's going to come. There's a chance we will become involved at that point. But on the other hand, we look at Trump. I think it's clear he does not want to have a real. He likes these, like brief bombing raids or whatever, or assassinations. He's done that against Iran twice. First against Soleimani in his first term, but then, of course, the attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities. That's the kind of thing he likes to do. And I think he does have a real aversion to, a real war, where we commit a substantial portion of our forces, and we do have troops on the ground. And But they're so.
You'll find one on his hand, though, if he keeps doing this.
Maybe that's right. Just because the thing is, again, he's in these situations where he may just have his hand forced, where he doesn't find a way out, and he's surrounded by people that are going to try to convince him that, oh yeah, it'll be easy, it'll just take 2 weeks, and then it'll be over, and you'll be the greatest president in history, and he just might fall for it. He just might fall for it. Let's be honest. So I don't think it's certain that we'll have a major war during his presidency, but there's very much a risk. Again, the world is a scary, very unstable place, and he surrounded himself with yes men and a lot of hawks. So even if he does have an aversion to real war, he may find himself in one.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely we'll find ourselves in a real war with Russia. I hope not. I mean, the only way that I think would happen is if Trump just paints himself in a corner where he says like no fly zone and F-16s are getting shot down, and he does something really crazy. Because he knows that would be the end of the world, or very could mean the end of the world. But he does seem to want to still escalate. It doesn't. I don't know. I don't know. I can't say. It's just like his rhetoric. He had that thing about, we got to go on offense. You can't just play defense. He had that comment. And is there something about sending like something called ERAMs? I don't.
Well, I mentioned it last time. That's the extended range aerial munitions, and they've been described as a cross between a bomb and a cruise missile. I think they're actually basically bombs that have rocket engines attached to them, and they're launched, from the air. And the range has been, they can go anywhere from, I think, 250 to like 462 kilometers. 460 kilometers would take you, if you fired it like right from the border of Ukraine and Russia, it would take you right to the edge of Moscow. According to my calculations. But one thing is that there's no way that actually, an F-16 is going to fly right up to the border. It would get shot down. They're staying back in Western Ukraine for a reason. They're terrified of Russia's air defenses and its own aircraft. So it would be an escalation of sorts, but it's not clear that. Again, the use of these munitions would require approval from the U.S. And he's actually suspended approval for the ATACMS. That was, one substantive change for the better that Trump made when he took office. Again, it was, as we recall, Biden towards the end of his term began to allow this, and this was a real escalation and raised the possibility of Russian retaliation against NATO forces. But Trump called that off, and maybe these ERAMs, it'll be the same thing. Okay, you guys can use these, but only within the so-called Ukraine, maybe up to and including Crimea. And the Russians have said, they understand, they consider that Russian territory, but they know other countries don't consider it. So they don't consider it, to be an outright attack on them by NATO. So it's not quite clear, and also it's not, he says there, I think like 3,500 of them are going to be sent, a considerable number, but it's not clear that when they'll be sent. I don't think that even that many exist. I heard that like the first batch of like 20 or 50 or something were going to be sent in something like 6 weeks. I remember seeing a report to that effect about a week ago. So it may not really amount to all that much. We'll see. Yeah, it's just like you don't know what's going on with Trump. There was that really, again, that very strange Truth Social post where he was actually seen to be, like reversing himself from before, blaming Biden for not going on offense. Before he blamed Biden for going on offense, and he's the one who ended that offense. So what is he talking about? I don't know. I don't know if it's just is meant to be just misdirection or something. I have no idea, or it's just confusion on his part. It's just not clear.
What I think it is that after the summit in Alaska, he had a good rosy feeling after talking with Putin. He's like, okay, yeah, we could do this. Deal's coming on the way. And then, nothing moves forward in a week or so. And then Russia just launched one of its largest missile and drone campaigns against Ukraine, and the four cities are under siege. We're seeing an acceleration in the Russian advance. And he's just in his mind, he was like, I thought we were almost done with this thing. What are you doing? Now I'm really angry at you, Putin. You were supposed to end this war, and I think that's just about how his mind works without realizing that, he just thinks that he had a good conversation with him, should be good. He had an okay conversation with the Europeans and Zelensky, then it's done. And then he just gets upset when he couldn't force it. He couldn't make it happen.
Yeah, right. Well, it still seems like he's, less hostile to Russia than he was before. I mean, before it was all sanctions, and Putin was the main problem. Now he says, yeah, Putin's, I'm kind of disappointed, but then I'm equally maybe more disappointed in Zelensky. I think beforehand I was saying that that's really probably what the Russians were hoping for, was to, they knew they're not going to get a real substantive change in policy, but if they could just influence them, to be just a little less hostile to them, that'll be helpful. Maybe it'll mean, no serious escalations, or we'll see.
Yeah. Do you have an update on that leak of the 1.7 million dead and missing? And is it also wounded? Because when I first read it, it was 1.7 million dead and missing.
Right.
So
that's my understanding, that it's 1.7 million dead and missing. And that's the way it's usually reported. Now, sometimes I've heard people talk about it and then they'll throw in the word wounded. And that completely changes it, because wounded could be 2/3 of it. And so, we're only talking about, I don't know.
Still a lot.
If that's the case. Yeah, it'd still be a lot, but maybe 1 million dead and missing. So that would change it entirely. But, as far as I understand, it really is. And that was just, people sometimes misspeaking or speaking a little bit too loosely. I don't really know. I'll have to just actually defer in this case to Alexander Mercouris, who has been following this. And he says that a lot of different people are going through the information. Apparently quite a bit, if not all of the information has been released. And they're finding that in general, I don't know, maybe not entirely, that it's holding up, that these people really are gone. And they were real people, and they're no longer among the living. Yeah, it seems to be,
just not in Ukraine, right? Many of them.
Yeah, there's right. There may be other explanations. That's true. They may have deserted, fled. We don't know. I don't know what the proportions are. Interestingly, for some reason, Zelensky lifted the prohibition against younger men from leaving the country. It used to be that anybody between the ages, I can't remember, 18 and 60 men were not allowed to leave Ukraine. And then that 18 to 24, that segment has been removed from that prohibition. And that began yesterday. And apparently there are long lines at the borders of young men just, trying to get out of the country. So I think that's actually very good news, because these are men that will not be killed, that they cannot be grabbed by the TCC. This is what I've heard. But then there's another story that said actually they need to sign up with the TCC first, but it shows that, maybe they're not being grabbed. It's just understood how unpopular it would be if they started grabbing the younger men in Ukraine. And so if they can get out of the country, that'll bring out about it. That means lives are going to be saved. Again, Ukraine will lose. It'll lose sooner, and it will lose with, there will be more Ukrainian young men who survive this. I wish them the best. I hope all of them get across the border.
Why would Zelensky do something like that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It just may be that he's feeling a lot of pressure. It's just, again, we can see how, from all these videos, even the ones that take place in, the TCC guys, the press gang guys grabbing people. It even happens in Western Ukraine, which is, again, the bedrock of ultranationalism. But, the common people do not like this, obviously. And you can see it from the reactions of people around, just passersby and whatever will just will intervene and try to help the guy. So there must be a great deal of resentment against this, and he's maybe he's just responding to the pressure. That's the only explanation that I can think of.
Something that maybe this is what I'm thinking is if I was in charge and I understood that right now there's no way I can win this war. My troops are being slowly depleted. But I understand that as long as I have troops, nobody's going to come to my aid. So maybe you just say jettison these people and then say, look, there is nothing here, nobody left.
Yeah.
You have to come now because now we have hit that empty bar, and now you have to come in and help us. Possibly, because I mean, like, what? Yeah. So far, that's all you've been doing is just been thinking, what's the point? Okay, maybe I will kill all the 18 to 24-year-olds, and maybe he has some conscience in there somewhere, and is just like, well, I can't just, I've already killed everybody between, 25 and 60 they're all 1.7 million dead or missing, tons have fled, so. I shouldn't just. This is the future of the country, right? This is the youth right here, 18.
Right.
These are the ones that will have children and bring in the next generation. Kill those. There's just no Ukraine. So maybe just let them all go and then tell Western Europe, it's like, you told us, this is it. You got to come in.
Yeah, you may be right. I really don't. Have a better explanation. That may be true.
It's very. It's surprising. I'm surprised when you told me that. So I'm just trying to figure out some way that how would you be okay with that, because it just doesn't seem normal for Zelensky to care about the lives of of the people of Ukraine anymore.
Yeah.
Well, Well, we'll just have to. This is just an ongoing tragedy. Does it look anything changing on the front? Are we looking at, the big developments?
Yeah, no, it's the same thing. It's a siege, essentially. I think it's fair to call a siege of Prokofsk, Konstantinovka, and Kupiansk. And I think in all three of those cities, there's some pretty good evidence that the Russians are actually already inside the city. I think especially in the case of Kupiansk. And these are one thing then the fourth one is Seversk, where they, maybe they haven't really come up to the outskirts of, it's a small town, but a very important one, they're described. So it's not quite a siege yet, but they're getting there. All of these actually have been kind of threatened by the Russians. The Russians approached these places long ago. Actually, in the case of Seversk, I remember it quite well. It was 2022. The Russians took Severodonetsk and then Lysychansk, and then the next one was Seversk. Because they took those two actually pretty good sized cities, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, fairly quickly. And then they started marching towards Seversk, and everybody seemed to expect that, Seversk is going to fall now. Now here's 3 years later. So they got there. Apparently, it was very well defended, and the Ukrainian commander there was, one of their best. And it's also the terrain was very much to the advantage of the Ukrainians. So the Russians just stopped, and they just didn't do anything there for better than 2 years. And it's only this year that you began to see movement, and now it looks like they've taken some of those high points that the Ukrainians held, and it looks like Seversk's days are numbered. And then, in the case of Kupiansk, I remember it was actually in 2023. It was, during the Ukraine's summer offensive that year. The one place where the Russians advanced was actually towards Kupiansk. They made a kind of a fairly rapid advance, and they got close to it, relatively close, and then stopped. But again, that was 2 years ago. But this year, again, they've made some very, very significant advances, and they have taken a lot of territory around Kupiansk. So there's, where there was no movement in these cities, or the case of Pokrovsk, remember they came close to Pokrovsk in the fall, and then nothing much happened. It was just, they slowly started to move around it. But again, this year it accelerated. So we've seen an acceleration around all these cities where in some cases there was really no movement for almost 3 years. And then, now all of them I think are likely to fall, by the end of this year. And that's going to just change the complete, and again, there's just not going to be much left of Donetsk. And then it just opens the way for the Russians to make much more rapid advances. We've seen when these important cities fall, then they can really move forward. So anyway, yeah, that's the situation I described last time. And it's basically the same. I just wanted to mention like how these actually cities have been in play for a long time. And now it's this year where we're seeing that they're likely to fall.
When do you think we'll see an end of this war?
Yeah, I think it's possible it could end. I don't think it's going to end this year. It could end next year, but it could even go on for like another 3 years or more. This has gone on a lot longer than any of us thought. I think, and it depends on how far the Russians choose to go. Are they going to stop? I don't think they're going to stop at the Dnieper, because again, they have laid claim to Kherson, and that is on the other side of the Dnieper.
What about Odessa?
I think it's very likely that they'll go to Odessa, again, that's a region of the country that's very favorable to them and a very important one. It's right there, very close to the Black Sea. But that also is going to raise the alarm bells for in Europe and in the West in general. I mean, I know like Macron himself says like we just can't let Odessa fall. They seem to have they understand like if Odessa falls, then Ukraine and all the NATO dreams of having access to the Black Sea, that's over. So I think they might hold their horses if the Russians stop at the Dnieper, if they go no farther than Kherson Oblast. But if they start marching towards Odessa, that might be the point. If it doesn't happen, that might be the point where we see some real reckless action on the part of the West.
If Ukraine is cut off from the Black Sea completely, I mean, was that a huge blow to countries like France? Like only if they're in their imperial hegemonic mindset, right?
Right. Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, it's just like, but they have that mindset. And this is really probably the main reason that the Russians are fighting this war. Apparently like even like prior to the launch of the SMO, the Russians learned that that changes were being made to the port, of Odessa to, I believe it was Odessa, that to actually make it conform to NATO specifications. It just was clear that, NATO had its eyes on it. Okay, we can't get Sevastopol. The Russians have taken Crimea, but we can do the same thing. We can have our port right here on the Black Sea. And I think that's something that the NATO really wants.
It's so stupid though. Why would you want that? Like, because if you are in a war with Russia, then that port is done. It's gone.
Yeah, right,
it's just destroyed.
Yeah,
all your boats are there, or they're sunk.
But yeah, basically it's just a provocation. It's kind of the equivalent of having the military bases in Iraq. They're just big, juicy targets for the Iranians. I think, but I don't know, these people just can't give up on their imperial dreams.
Well, it's like what Jeffrey Sachs says. I think it is for them just like the game of Risk. They just want to put our pieces everywhere, and it's just fun for them to put their piece there. Right.
Yeah, it's the way that I think that they learned to think that way. And especially, there was a time when they could get away with that kind of behavior,
Who
back
came
in the
up with
90s.
that game? Maybe that's the person we need to blame. Maybe that's what raised a whole generation of psychopathic imperialists, It's whoever invented that. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, I don't have anything to add to that. I think you're right.
Okay. Well, we should end it soon, but I just want to. I feel like we should just do a quick Gaza check-in. What's any? I know there's never good news, but is there anything on the any promising signs of change of hope?
Yeah, I wouldn't really say this is a promising sign, but again, the Hamas agreed to a partial ceasefire. A kind of a temporary ceasefire, or something that they were holding out against. But I think that just the horror of what's going on there has caused them to agree to it. It was actually a ceasefire that the Israelis themselves agreed to a couple months ago. And now finally Hamas has agreed to it. It was something that was worked out between Hamas and Egypt and Qatar. But now the Israelis are basically ignoring it. They're stonewalling it. even though this is something that they agreed to before, and it would, lead to the release of at least half of the hostages. And it was actually, again, popular within Israel. So, because it's clear, Netanyahu has his eyes on Gaza City right now. Again, the largest city within Gaza, northern Gaza. And he's beginning operations against it. And this is something he wants to completely level the city. And I think, again, is clearly part of an ethnic cleansing campaign and a plan to maybe to reintroduce settlements, at least into northern Gaza. So, yeah, there's that. Now, I saw another poll that came out in Israel. It was actually done by Hebrew University. And it found that I think it was something like 76% of Israelis. Now, I have trouble believing that. I think it must be Jewish Israelis. It was reported as Israelis. Because, again, 20% of the population of Israel is Arab, and they generally, have very different responses to these kind of questions. But it said Israelis. I'm going to assume that it was actually Jewish Israelis. I think it was 76% actually felt that there were no innocents in Gaza. Now, the same polling organization also asked them about the hostages and is it more important to destroy Hamas or to bring the hostages home? And a majority, something like 65%, says that bring the hostages home. So that's what the situation we have, broadly speaking. Actually, the majority clearly is against Netanyahu's policy, to try to avoid ceasefires and just go for, total devastation. But it's not because they're concerned about Palestinians. Let's just put it that way. They really don't care. That's just a sad truth. That's what these polls have showed again and again. It's just that they want the hostages home. So, but Netanyahu has made the calculation. He just understands that if he goes along with that, if he calls off the invasion, the occupation of Gaza City, that his coalition will fall apart. So that's what he's doing. Then we have, something that's been very much in the news, and this is sort of the thing that happens just occasionally. It's just that there's some incident that actually does get the attention of the Western media. I mean, there are things really that happen every day, but they're generally ignored. But this one, partly because the reporters that were killed, two of them were working for Western media, one for Reuters, and the other one was for, actually, I forget right now. But there were two, maybe it was, I can't remember. Okay, but there were two reporters out of 5 that were killed on a strike on a hospital. And then there were a number of first responders, medical personnel that were killed, a total of 20, a strike on a hospital. And
it was a double tap on the hospital.
Yeah, right. I've even heard that it was really a triple tap. The second tap was actually 2 in quick succession. And there's footage of it, and it's just horrifying. Yeah. And it's just so clear. And the Israeli explanation, which I think is probably just a lie, but even if it's true, it's hardly a justification. They say, well, there was the camera that they believed Hamas was using. That camera was up on the hospital, so they fired at the hospital and killed these reporters and these medical personnel. They felt like that was a reasonable explanation. But it was one of these incidents, again, there's so many that we know about, and most of them are ignored, 99% of them are ignored. But occasionally something like this gets through, and it really shocks people in the West. And this is one of them. And I think it's because of partly because these reporters, one, like the one for Reuters, and it actually led to a resignation, from Reuters of another journalist who said, I can't work for this organization, because Reuters didn't really defend her, didn't even mention her by name or anything. It was really, should be very upsetting to, her colleagues there in Reuters. But it got the attention, and Netanyahu was actually forced to express an apology, and, the IDF made some statement, and of course they're going to investigate it, but we know what happens with IDF investigations. It'll be a whitewash. And then I've heard, they're trying to pin the blame on some local commander, but the soldiers in the unit are angry because they say, well, you're making a scapegoat. No, we got the instructions from, higher up. This was approved, by someone at the top. So anyway, that's part of the ongoing nightmare, the horror. But again, the only good thing about this is that this actually seems to have penetrated, the mainstream to some extent, and it has forced the Israelis briefly to show some sort of concern and express some kind of contrition. But it's no signs that it's affecting policy. The same thing's happening. The leveling of Gaza City has begun. The aid seekers continue to be killed, a couple dozen every day. It's all continuing. Nothing's changed.
And do you think that Israel will be able to completely level Gaza City? I mean, this is a big city, right? Around 1 million people prior, right? Approximately.
Well, it was 700,000 prior, but it has over 1 million now because there's so many refugees within the city. But already, there are, for example, there is an Orthodox church within the city, and they say we're not moving because we have a lot of very sick, and wounded people here. We can't move them, and and we've learned from experience that the places you send us to are not safe, so we're staying. And then there's a Catholic church, I think that's right on the edge of Gaza City, and they've said the same thing. And I think that there are a lot of people that just aren't going to move. They're sick of moving, and they find that there really isn't any sanctuary. So I think, but they might just go ahead and level it. As long as they keep on getting a steady supply of bombs from the U.S., they'll just do it. That seems to be their intention.
How long would it take to level a city like Gaza? I mean,
well, they're talking about at least a couple of months. By the end of the year. And then after that, there'll be just they'll focus on trying to find the underground infrastructure, the tunnels and so forth that Hamas has been using. And it won't end until somewhere in 2026.
So you think that we'll see this sort of just nonstop horror in Gaza City for the next 5-6 months until it's completely leveled and everybody's either dead or pushed out?
I'm afraid so. Yeah. I mean, it's just that's what we've seen, in the nearly 2 years since October 7th.
And then once that's done, do you think then we'll start a war with Iran, or do you think that's going to come while this is happening?
Yeah, I don't know. We've talked about the calculations that
I just feel like that's the only thing that'll stop it, Iran, or unless I'm praying for some financial collapse in the United States.
Yeah,
those are the only two things.
Right. I'm very pessimistic. For the Gazans, I think, like I've said many times, I think the collapse of Israel and of Zionism is inevitable, but I don't think it'll come in time for the people of Gaza.
That's awful. Okay, well, I guess we can end it there, Dad.
Okay.
I don't know what to say. I just don't know what you say. There's nothing we can do. I mean, there is no hope. It's always so depressing talking about it.
Well,
just
I wouldn't say there's no hope, but I just being realistic. I don't see it. There's sometimes we can be surprised. We can be surprised in both good and bad directions. Let's just hope for one of those surprises, a little miracle. That's, I know that's, we can't depend on that, it probably won't happen. But, events can take a very sudden and unexpected turn sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think just the more that we keeping the pressure on talking about Gaza, talking about Palestine, don't let up.
Right.
The world's turning against it.
Right. Don't let it become normal. That's why even sometimes I say, hey, I haven't even talked about it for several days, for example, say, that's not right, because this is, we can't accept it. I found myself just getting used to it, the daily horror. We can't let ourselves get used to it. And so we have to keep on talking about it.
It's weird. It's weird because I'm here in Tennessee and I'll get on X and then you just see these people just saying please pray for me. I'm starving to death. This may be, you just see posts like these from people that are just are these pictures of, children with missing limbs or that are starving. It's just, it's just strange that that it is kind of just become normalized because it's so much of it. It's just like, oh, there's another person that's starving to death on my phone, and it's a real person, and they're asking for help. But we can't do anything. Keep scrolling. I was like, oh, ad for McDonald's. Maybe I'm hungry. You know, it's weird. It's weird.
Right.
I don't. Yeah. But you're right. The problem is, I think it is becoming normalized, but we can't let it become normal. This is awful. This is a genocide, and it needs to end. It needs to end now. Okay. All right, Dad. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day and a great weekend.
You too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.